What if during the Paramount War, Ace awakened his devil fruit? Would he have survived his execution? And how would the story of One Piece change? Everything remains the same up to the major turning point in the story of One Piece, the Marineford arc. Luffy's adopted brother, Porcus D. Ace, is captured by the Marines and has been sentenced to execution. All because of a certain pain-in-the-butt pirate who goes by the name Blackbeard. Blackbeard fought and defeated Ace, who was out to get him to gain favor with the Marines. The Marines call for a grand public execution to send a message to pirates everywhere that even the son of the former pirate king is not above their hold over the seas. Ace's capture has caused waves across the seas, as he's also a commander in Whitebeard's crew, and the Emperor of the Sea isn't known to take things kindly when his children are in harm's way. Whitebeard calls his entire crew, declaring that messing with one of them means messing with him. When word reaches Whitebeard that Ace is to be executed, the old Emperor intends to show the Marines why he is known as the strongest man alive. Meanwhile, the Marines are gathering their own forces since they know they'll have to face off against the Whitebeard pirates. Among those forces are the notorious warlords of the sea. These 7 pirates are technically on the Marines' payroll in a way and are used to balance out the powers on the sea. Among them are Dracula Mihawk, the strongest swordsman in the world, Gecko Moria, a pirate who can create an army, Don Quixote do Flamingo, an extremely cunning warrior, Boa Hancock, and so on. You'd think that the Marines themselves would be enough, but you can never be too careful when you're facing one of the top pirate crews on the seas. The entire world was in a frenzy over the impending clash between Whitebeard's pirates and the Marines. Pirates, revolutionaries, and even the average guy at the pub couldn't stop gossiping about what was coming. Other pirate crews, revolutionaries, and everyday citizens were buzzing about what would happen next. Even the other emperors weren't sitting still. Kaido intended to interfere in the war just for the hell of it, but thankfully, Shanks went around to stop the massive dragon from participating. The war definitely threw the seas into chaos. As the Whitebeard pirates arrived at Marineford, Ace watched on, knowing that his defeat had caused his crew to suffer. Despite being an incredibly powerful pirate, Ace's loss to Blackbeard led to this moment, where his entire crew and adoptive father would be put in harm's way. The guilt and anger he felt toward himself were unimaginable, unable to do anything but watch as the war unfolded in front of his very eyes. As Ace kneeled on the execution platform, he saw the battle raging around him. It was a deafening roar of clashing swords, cannon fire, and men fighting for their lives. It wasn't a pretty sight by any means, but to Ace, everything felt surreal. His arms were bound with sea stone cuffs, and despite being a powerful pirate, they turned him into nothing more than a spectator at the heart of this war. Nothing weighed on him as heavily as the guilt clawing at his chest. Ace looked on as his crewmates, his family, were fighting tooth and nail to get him back. Marco was in the sky, clashing with one admiral after another. Jozu felt like a human shield, taking in and defending as many crewmates as he could, all the while his diamond body reflected the chaos around him. But the most painful part was that Whitebeard himself was in the heart of the battle. Despite his age and sickness, Whitebeard continued pushing through the Marines as if he were still a young pirate, hell-bent on getting his son back. All this for him, and that's when the realization cut the deepest. This was all his fault. Whitebeard had warned Ace not to go after Blackbeard, but he just didn't listen. His recklessness led to the events unfolding before his very eyes. If he hadn't gone after Blackbeard, if he'd just ignored his pride and listened to Whitebeard, none of this would be happening. And now, the price he had to pay was watching his foster family put themselves in danger just to get him back. He had dragged everyone into a war that rightfully would have never happened if he'd thought things through. And then, the worst part came. Luffy suddenly came crashing onto the battlefield with what looked like prisoners. Ace's heart stopped for a few seconds as he saw his brother arrive and start fighting through the battlefield. Wild thoughts wouldn't stop flooding his mind. If he hadn't been so foolish, if he hadn't gotten captured, if he hadn't been born, none of this would be happening. His family wouldn't be bleeding for him, and Luffy wouldn't be throwing his life on the line. Everyone was suffering because of him, because of his pride, because he couldn't just let things be. The war raged on, but the real battle was the one tearing him apart inside. Then, his foster grandfather arrived. Garp, a vice admiral in the Marines, Luffy's grandfather, and the man who took Ace in, came to sit beside him on the execution platform. Garp's heart, too, was in turmoil. He had his duties to uphold, and he had no sympathy for criminals. But for his family, he did. Garp teared up as he sat with Ace, full of guilt, and it was one of the many things that drowned Ace in regret. Luffy soon broke through the front lines with the help of Ivankov and his growing crew of escapees from Impel Down. Garp clenched his fists and looked on, seeing his grandson bruised and battered but not backing away, hell-bent on saving his brother. Garp couldn't stand against Luffy with a stone in his heart. It was his wavering emotions that let Luffy knock him off the platform. Together with Mr. Three's wax powers, Luffy broke Ace's chains and freed him. The next few moments were a rush. Ace displayed his powers, finding a new will to live as he rushed with Luffy toward Whitebeard. All Ace could think of was how to pay back Whitebeard and his crew for everything they had done. Ace and Luffy fought side by side, fending off the Marines with everything they had as they began carving a path toward Whitebeard. The joy of being reunited was overshadowed by the urgency of the situation. They had to escape as quickly as possible, but Sakazuki had other plans. The Admiral appeared, magma dripping from his fists, and he began berating Whitebeard. Ace was already a wreck from the entire situation, and Sakazuki's words blinded him from logic. Ace became enraged at Sakazuki's words, and instead of running away, he charged at the Admiral, surrounded by his flames. The two Logia users clashed, but Ace quickly realized that Sakazuki's magma was stronger than his flames. The Admiral quickly had Ace on the ropes as the Whitebeard pirates looked on in horror. Sakazuki wasn't playing around, and he gathered his power before unleashing a fist meant to end Ace's life. Time seemed to slow down, but in the next moment, Sakazuki was replaced with Luffy. It took Ace a few moments to process what had just happened. Luffy had jumped between Sakazuki and his brother, shielding him with his own body. The magma fist went right through Luffy's chest, and Luffy soon collapsed on top of Ace. Luffy was still smiling despite having a hole in his chest. He told Ace that he promised to save him as Ace's heart shattered and pulled him away from the battlefield. Sakazuki prepared another attack, but Whitebeard stepped in next. Whitebeard's fury and rage caused Marineford to shake as he punched Sakazuki right in the face. The Emperor proceeded to decimate the Admiral as Ace cried and screamed, unable to process the situation. In the background, Garp flew into an absolute rage, his conqueror's haki rushing through the battlefield as he saw his grandson impaled by the Admiral. Sengoku had to step in using his Buddha form, as Garp was too enraged to listen to reason. Marineford began to crack from the fury of these two powerful individuals. But that's when the Blackbeard pirates arrived, taking advantage of the opportunity to face the weakened Whitebeard. Blackbeard pulled out all the stops, and eventually Whitebeard would fall. Ace's mind broke at the sight, and soon flames began enveloping him. His rage, coupled with the ocean of grief, showed in his flames. The color of his flames began changing as he walked in Blackbeard's direction. Marco tried to stop Ace to get him back to safety, but Ace's flames had begun glowing blue. Their heat neared the temperatures of plasma, and everything started erupting into flames. Jinbei took Luffy's body and retreated towards the Whitebeard pirates. The air around Ace crackled as his body glowed a fierce blue, and with unimaginable speed, Ace zipped towards Blackbeard. His fist collided with the pirate faster than Blackbeard could summon his darkness to nullify it, sending him flying before he could take Whitebeard's devil fruit. The other Blackbeard pirates intervened and began attacking Ace, but they could barely get close enough to fight him. Ace was screaming at the top of his lungs with a fury that seemed to deafen the battlefield, and the Blackbeard pirates had to go on the defensive. Blackbeard felt fear at the sight and began to retreat. Ace, blinded by his rage, attacked whichever enemy he could see while protecting his foster father's body. But this wouldn't last long. His awakened devil fruit was taking a heavy toll on him in his current condition, and Ace was using his life force to stay ablaze. The other admirals then entered the picture, and the Blackbeard pirates began making their escape. Before the island could shatter, a wave of haki flooded Marineford as Shanks appeared with his crew. Seeing the situation, Shanks quickly stepped in and clashed with Ace to stop him from causing further destruction. Marco and Jozu intervened as well, holding back Ace as his flames burned them. Ace's blue flames began dying down, returning to orange before Ace's face could be seen. Steam rose from his eyes as his tears continued to evaporate. His flames finally went out, and Ace collapsed in Marco's arms. Before the admirals could take advantage of the opportunity, Shanks declared that any further attacks would result in the Red Hair pirates joining the war. The Marines couldn't possibly afford another emperor warring against them, and so a ceasefire was declared. The Whitebeard pirates retreated to their base along with Whitebeard and Luffy's bodies. Meanwhile, Ace had collapsed and was bedridden. It wasn't until a few days later that Ace finally awakened, his body wrapped in bandages. Marco was tending to him when Ace asked where Whitebeard and Luffy were. Memories of what happened began flooding in as he remembered everything. His brother and his father had both passed away. Ace got up and limped outside. Marco guided him with a heavy heart toward the two graves he had made on the island of Sphinx. Ace sat in front of the two graves as memories and emotions flooded his mind. He spent a night and a day in front of them, going through all the emotions of grief. At the end of it, Ace vowed to avenge his family. The celestial dragons who had killed Sabo, the Blackbeard pirates who had taken his father, and Sakazuki, the man who had killed his brother. Ace decided to split from the Whitebeard pirates. He didn't want to involve his family any further and intended to take on the burden of his revenge alone. But first, he needed to get stronger and gain control of his newfound power. Ace left for an isolated island and began training there, harnessing his awakened abilities. During the next 2 years, Ace continued working on his haki while also learning to control his blue flames. When superheated, Ace gained the ability to turn into plasma. His blue flames reached temperatures so intense that they could vaporize solid materials upon contact. The sheer heat could melt stone, turn steel into molten slag, and even warp the air around him with heat waves. Ace learned to create concentrated streams of plasma, giving him long-range offensive capabilities akin to a blade. His mastery over haki improved considerably, as did his control over his conqueror's haki. By the end of the 2-year period, half of the uninhabited island had become engulfed in undying flames that remained even after Ace left, permanently changing the area. During the 2-year time skip, many things happened that Ace would be unaware of. In this timeline, the main protagonist is dead, and with his death, the Straw Hat crew has no foundation to stand on. Word of Luffy's death soon reached all of his crewmates as the papers publicized that the infamous rookie pirate had died along with Whitebeard and numerous others during the battle at Marineford. After burying Luffy, Jinbei set out to find the remaining members of the Straw Hats. He found each one during the 2-year time skip and asked them about their plans moving forward. Zoro's fury was clear. He had been unable to protect his captain. His weakness had proved to be too great, but he vowed to carry on Luffy's dream and ensure that no one forgot his name. Zoro wanted to get stronger under Mihawk and told Jinbei to gather everyone else in 2 years. They would meet on Sabaody Archipelago, and the remaining members would move forward and carry on Luffy's will. Jinbei carried word of Zoro's resolve to each crewmate, and each Straw Hat member strengthened their resolve and trained to become stronger than ever before. Garp, on the other hand, had been forced into retirement. Despite the destruction he caused at Marineford after Luffy's death, Sengoku had held him mostly at bay. With the Fleet Admiral's resignation and backing, Garp wasn't sentenced to imprisonment, and instead retired, remaining a symbol for the Marines as a hero. The Blackbeard pirates continued to rise in power due to their infamy. Despite not gaining Whitebeard's devil fruit, Blackbeard was still declared a new emperor of the sea, filling the gap left by Whitebeard's demise. The rest of the events of the story were similar to the original timeline. However, the Straw Hats grew even stronger during their training as Luffy's death fueled them. Jinbei returned to Ace near the end of the 2-year period and told him that Luffy's crew was gathering in the Sabaody Archipelago. Ace could do with that information whatever he wished. Ace had grown much stronger during the time period, and he had revenge on his mind. But thinking it over, Ace owed it to Luffy to carry on his dream. Ace made his decision. 2 years had passed since the war at Marineford, but the scars left behind were still fresh in the hearts of many. The world had changed, and so had the Straw Hat pirates. Each had grown massively stronger, but that wasn't the only thing that was different. The man who once led them, Monkey D. Luffy, was no longer there. His dream of becoming the Pirate King had been cut short at Marineford when he sacrificed his life to save his brother. The Straw Hats had not only lost their captain, but their friend as well. On the shores of Sabaody, Zoro was the first to arrive. Nami followed, and the rest of the crew soon arrived as well. Each one of them carried the weight of Luffy's absence, but they wouldn't let his dream die with him. The crew gathered at Grove 13, the meeting place they had agreed upon 2 years prior. Then a familiar figure walked toward them. The crew saw Luffy's straw hat atop the figure's head. It was Ace. Ace had spent the last 2 years consumed by grief and guilt, knowing Luffy died for him. But after Whitebeard's death and the collapse of his crew, Ace had found a new resolve. He wasn't going to let Luffy's dream die. As Ace stepped forward and met the Straw Hats, the air was heavy, but Ace's spirit was ablaze. He told the crew that he intended to carry the mantle of Luffy's dream and at the same time wished to avenge him. He knew he wasn't a replacement for Luffy, but he wouldn't let his dream go unfulfilled. Everyone standing there knew they had the same intention, and their quiet resolve would be enough. The Straw Hats accepted Luffy's brother into the crew. Again. Ace would continue on the Straw Hats' journey and go on towards Fishman Island. They cleaned up the island, defeating Hody Jones and liberating it before receiving a distress call from Punk Hazard. After quickly dealing with Caesar Clown and befriending Kinemon, the alliance with Trafalgar D. Waterlaw would be put on hold as Ace heard word that Trafalgar D. Waterlaw would be Gura Gura no Mi had been found. It was currently being held up as a prize for a tournament. The gang headed to Dressrosa as Ace intended to get his father's devil fruit back. The fruit granted the wielder the power to create earthquakes, and Ace couldn't let that power fall into the wrong hands. But Ace wasn't the only one after it, because Blackbeard had also set his sights on the devil fruit. At the mention of Blackbeard, Ace's eyes flared with anger. That traitor, the man responsible for the chain of events that led to Whitebeard's death and his own capture. It was personal now. The thought of Blackbeard gaining his father's powers was unthinkable. Ace, Zoro, and Sanji entered the tournament while the rest of the crew went undercover to gather information. The Coliseum was packed, with spectators cheering as fighters from all over the world gathered to claim the legendary prize. The tournament soon began in earnest, and the Straw Hats were clearly too overpowered for the rest of the combatants. But it wouldn't be long before trouble reared its ugly head. The tournament grounds suddenly trembled as Blackbeard entered the field. He wasn't alone either. Shiryu of the Rain, Van Augur, and Jesus Burgess surrounded him as the Blackbeard pirates crashed the tournament. Their reputation as an Emperor crew preceded them, as they'd been taking over Whitebeard's territories while Ace was out training. Blackbeard hadn't expected Ace to be at the tournament and taunted him for taking over his brother's crew after letting him die. The comments enraged even Zoro and Sanji as the rest of the crew looked on, ready to back up the mains. Ace's flames flared up in response, engulfing his body. Blackbeard taunted him again as darkness began flowing from him. He told Ace this would just be a repeat of Bonaro Island, as he could neutralize any devil fruit. Zoro was the first to move, aiming to slay Blackbeard, but Shiryu clashed with him. The fight began in earnest, with the Gura Gura no Mi as the grand prize. Jesus Burgess lunged toward the Gura Gura no Mi, but Sanji intercepted him with a blazing kick. Ace leapt into action, his fiery fists colliding with Blackbeard's dark vortex. The flames of the Mera Mera no Mi met the suffocating darkness of the Yami Yami no Mi. Blackbeard's laughter echoed through the arena as he attempted to pull Ace's flames into his darkness, taunting him over his inability to save his little brother. Ace's eyes burned with rage. Luffy's death flashed in his mind. The moment his little brother gave his life to save him, he gritted his teeth, pushing his flames harder, the heat intensifying until his fire shifted from orange to blue. Ace took a step back before the air around him started to ignite. His flames shifted to blue before blitzing around him like plasma. Blackbeard recognized the power from Marineford, but also realized it wasn't wild and unruly like before. Ace had complete control over it. The crowd began scattering due to the heat, and Blackbeard tried to smother it with his darkness. But Ace was much faster. Meanwhile, the Straw Hats fought Blackbeard's crew with everything they had. Zoro and Shiryu clashed in a deadly sword duel, their blades sparking with each blow. Sanji's kick sent Burgess crashing into the walls, while Usopp provided long-range support, keeping the enemy snipers at bay. The fight didn't last long, though, as Ace continued pummeling Blackbeard. He told the rest of the crew to retreat as he backed off and used Flame Emperor. Only this time, it wasn't a sun that Ace created, but rather a star. The miniature sun-like ball of plasma sent shivers down Blackbeard's spine. Blackbeard quickly summoned his darkness as Ace launched the ball of plasma, but the power was too strong for Blackbeard. The darkness isn't able to fully absorb the attack, and it hits Blackbeard's arm, searing him massively. The rest of the Emperor's crew quickly backtrack and retreat as the aftermath of Ace's attacks destroys most of the Colosseum. Despite losing his arm, Blackbeard vows to take revenge on Ace. With the imminent threat gone, Ace turns his attention toward the Gura Gura no Mi. He takes his father's devil fruit and thinks long and hard about it. Memories flooding his mind. He then proceeds to hand the devil fruit over to Zoro. He tells him that he deserves the power wielded by the world's strongest man. After getting out of the Colosseum, a certain someone would make an appearance. Leaning against a ruined pillar was none other than Sabo! The brother Ace thought was dead. Tears welled up in Ace's eyes as he realized this wasn't a dream, and the two brothers hugged each other tight. Ace told him that he wasn't able to save Luffy. The reunion was very bittersweet as the two brothers took some time to compose themselves and talk about everything that had happened after Luffy's death. Ace told Sabo that he intended to gain Luffy, so Sabo asked him if he wanted to join the revolutionaries with him. Ace declined the offer, saying that he was going to carry on with Luffy's dream along with the rest of the Straw Hats. He'd make sure that it was fulfilled. After the events here, the gang would continue to dismantle Doflamingo's operations in Dressrosa, and the Warlord would pose little threat to the Straw Hats with Ace and his awakened devil fruit at the helm, along with Zoro's newfound abilities with the power of the Gura Gura no Mi. After the events on the island, Sabo told Ace that he's currently looking for word of Luffy's devil fruit appearing. He intends on securing the devil fruit, and as such, Ace tells him to give word if Sabo finds any clues. Blackbeard's defeat would crown Ace as a new emperor, and the Straw Hats would be declared as one of the strongest on the seas. After the events at Dressrosa, Sanji would be called over by the Vinsmokes to participate in the wedding arrangement between him and the daughter of Big Mom. This time, though, considering the strength of the crew, Sanji declines, giving priority to Luffy's dream and his own. The Straw Hats already angered Kaido, and now they'll have Big Mom to worry about as well. But Ace doesn't care much, since he intended on fighting the two emperors anyway. The adventure would continue until eventually, Sabo would get in contact with Ace. It seems like Luffy's devil fruit had made an appearance, but the Marines were quick to retrieve it and took the fruit to Egghead. The revolutionaries are curious as to why the devil fruit is being kept on the island, and why the Marines had used so many resources to get it. Ace, on the other hand, only wanted his brother's legacy back, and decided to head out with his crew to retrieve it. He wasn't the only one after the devil fruit, though. The pair pirates had set sail for the island as well. When the Marines heard word that the Straw Hats were making their way for the island, they sent in Kizaru to deal with them. Our gang arrived before all the other parties, and although the way in was bumpy, the crew eventually met with Vegapunk. The world government had dissolved the Shichibukai system by this point, and all previous warlords were given bounties once more. The Marines had new weapons in the form of the Seraphim, and the events at the Levely, including the attack by the revolutionaries, had already taken place. The Cross Guild had also been established, and despite taking a severe loss, the Blackbeard pirates were still making moves, although less aggressively. After meeting with Vegapunk, the gang is told all about the reality of the devil fruit known as the Gomu Gomu no Mi. Vegapunk tells them how the devil fruit gives the wielder the ability to become Nika, an ancient godly figure meant to represent freedom and liberation, and the fact that it seems to have a connection with Joy Boy. Before Vegapunk can reveal more, though, the Marines near the vicinity of the island. Everything turns into chaos from there, as Kizaru lands on the island. But at this point, both Ace and Zoro can comfortably take him on. The fight between the two is a glorious battle, but it seems like Ace's awakened plasma form can keep up even with Kizaru's speed. Meanwhile, the rest of the Marines are easily taken care of by the crew, as Zoro poses to be among the strongest of pirates now that he has the Gura Gura no Mi. But things wouldn't stay easy for long, as an ominous air began surrounding the island. A dark circle of magic appears, and suddenly, an elder has entered the playing field. J. Garcia Saturn appears, and upon seeing the threat, transforms into his yokai form. The odds become a bit more even as Ace takes on the elder, while Zoro proceeds to deal deal with Kizaru. The only problem is that the Elder invokes a Buster Call on the island. The resulting battles would be complete and utter chaos, as Saint Saturn has some incredible regeneration. Besides the same, Shanks too is on his way to the island, and up to this point, there are a few reasons to consider his motives a bit suspicious, especially with how cold-hearted he can be when dealing with those opposing him, and the fact that he seems to have a connection with Emu himself. In this story, the other Elders would arrive on the island as well, since it wouldn't be too much of a hassle for Ace and the rest of the gang to hold back both Kizaru and Saint Saturn. Even without his awakened Devil Fruit, Ace also has a great command over all three forms of Haki. Zoro himself was already a beast to begin with, but now that his swordsmanship is backed by earthquakes behind him, he could easily level an entire island. We have to remember, with Luffy no longer in the picture, Emu would never awaken. And in the event that all of the Elders arrived on the island, our gang would be put in an incredibly difficult position due to how unkillable these guys are. And with Emu out of the picture, Joy Boy's Haki wouldn't be used to send the Elders back to Mary Jawaz. Then there's the appearance of Shanks. Would he fight against the Elders and back our crew? Or would he instead stay on the back foot? Or even worse, what if he actually sides with the Elders? Make sure to subscribe for more One Piece content.